Welcome to the deep dive. We sort through the sources, pull out the key insights, basically giving you the shortcut to being genuinely informed. Today, we're getting into a really captivating and, frankly, quite heartbreaking real-life mystery. It's one that's echoed way beyond Thailand, the tragic death of the actress Tangmo Nida Patcharaveerapong.
Yeah, it's a case that keeps popping up in the news,
Yeah.
It's got layers of intense public interest and this sort of relentless search for answers, for clarity. We'll be looking at the facts, the controversies, using the sources you've shared with us. And then we'll kind of zoom out a bit.
Right.
Connect this specific tragedy to that bigger cultural fascination we all seem to have with true crime, especially now, in the age of streaming.
Exactly. And our sources today are, well, they're pretty diverse. We've got everything from minute-by-minute news reports, chronologies of the case, to some really interesting analyses of the whole true crime genre itself, and even a look at how companies like, say, Netflix decide what shows to make.
So our job, really, as your guides here, is to help you understand not just what happened, but maybe get a handle on why these stories grab us so much and, what are the implications of how we consume them.
Couldn't have said it better. Let's dig in. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Thursday, February 24th, 2022. Tangmo Nida, she was a 37-year-old Thai actress, pretty well known for dramas like The Fallen Leaf, some films too, like Ghost of Maynak.
Right.
She was on a speedboat. This is on the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. And around 10:40 p.m. Local time, she fell into the water.
And this is where the initial story gets quite, unusual.
Yeah.
The report was she was trying to use the bathroom, basically, off the back of the boat when she fell in. Her manager didn't report her missing until the next day. And the search, well, it was agonizing. Took 38 hours.
Wow.
They finally found her body on Saturday, February 26th, just after 1 p.m.
So the police come out with initial findings pretty quickly, March 1st.
Yeah.
They confirm drowning. They mention sand in her lungs, which, indicates she was breathing when she went in.
Right. Standard procedure. Checks out.
But almost immediately, there are these red flags. A deep wound on her left leg.
The propeller wound.
Possibly from the propeller, yeah. And that straight away complicates this idea of just a simple, tragic accident.
And it's really telling how quickly the public suspicion started building. Tangmo's own mother, Panida Siriyuthayothan, she voiced distrust right away, especially about the speedboat driver.
Right.
And the police, they acted fast too. Issued arrest warrants for the owner and the driver. Turned out the boat's license was expired as well.
Another detail.
Yeah. And the 5 friends who were on the boat with Tangmo, they all had to do lie detector tests.
Which you can just imagine only cranked up the public scrutiny, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That initial skepticism wasn't quiet. It pretty much exploded into widespread disbelief. That story about falling off during a, quote, toilet break. Yeah. People just weren't buying it.
No. And the sources we looked at really highlight this. The accounts from the 5 people on board, they were apparently full of inconsistencies.
Shifting stories.
Yeah, shifting, fragmented, missing key details. It almost immediately led to these really strong accusations of a cover-up, like a coordinated one.
And those inconsistencies, they naturally make you ask, okay, what else is going on here? What's feeding this distrust? Well, there were these really critical claims that the boat was cleaned almost right after the incident.
Which could destroy forensic evidence, obviously.
Exactly. And then allegations that photos, videos might have been deleted from phones.
Oh, wow.
So you connect that dots, and it starts to look like, at least to the public, an attempt to control the story, which, of course, just made this suspicion even deeper.
Totally backfired. The whole investigation, it just spiraled. One source we read called it a circus.
That sounds about right.
And this chaos, it just eroded public trust, not just in the police, but the media, forensic science, even basic things like, friendship and motherhood came under fire. So even though the police eventually said the evidence pointed to negligence causing death, a lot of people just weren't convinced. Online investigators, citizen sleuths, they were constantly pointing out irregularities.
And it didn't help that one of the suspects was wealthy, apparently had influential connections. That just threw fuel on the fire, raising doubts about the whole justice process.
Right.
Suddenly, the keywords everyone's talking about are money, influence, police. It shows how one case can tap into these deeper societal anxieties about, fairness, accountability. People wanted transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And this specific, very tragic case, it makes you step back and wonder, doesn't it? Why are we, as a society, so drawn to these real-life mysteries?
It's a huge phenomenon.
Huge. Statistics show something like half of Americans engage with true crime.
Yeah, and for 13%, it's their absolute favorite genre, which is significant.
And it's not new, is it? This has a long history.
Absolutely not. It goes way back. You had pamphlets about crimes in the 1500s, then you get landmark stuff like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood in 65.
A game changer.
Definitely. And then, more recently, podcasts like Serial in 2014 really kicked off the modern boom we're seeing now.
So why do people watch? What are the motivations?
Well, the surveys show a few key things. A huge chunk, like 73%, say it's just curiosity.
Okay.
Then you've got 46% who find it entertaining, which is an interesting word to use.
Yeah.
45% like the mystery element, trying to piece it together.
Like solving a puzzle.
Exactly. 33% mention the storytelling. 32% just find it fascinating. A small group, 10% like the adrenaline rush.
The short, sharp shock idea.
Right, but in a safe space, from your couch.
Yeah.
And about 7% actually say they watch it to feel more prepared for potential danger themselves.
Interesting. So it feels like you're involved, like an armchair detective, without any actual risk?
Pretty much. You feel invested, like maybe you could spot the clue everyone else missed.
So what does this fascination say about us, about society?
Well, it definitely points to a deep curiosity about, human psyche, why people do terrible things, and there's a clear interest in justice, how law enforcement works, or sometimes doesn't work.
Right. It often highlights those systemic issues, doesn't it? Corruption, inequality, things that might otherwise stay hidden.
Exactly. Which can spark important conversations, even if the initial draw is entertainment.
And speaking of how we consume this, you can't really talk about the true crime boom without talking about streaming services, particularly Netflix.
Oh, absolutely. Netflix plays a massive role. They use an incredible amount of data.
Like what?
Well, what you watch, obviously, but also when you watch, how long you watch, even what you search for on their platform that they don't currently have. All that feeds into what they decide to greenlight or buy.
So they know what audiences want, sometimes before the audience does.
Kind of. And they've made this big shift towards producing their own content, their originals, including documentaries.
Why is that so important for them?
Well, it builds their brand, gives them control over the intellectual property long term. It's not just licensing something that could go to a competitor later. It creates lasting value.
And part of that strategy involves focusing on local content too, right? This local to global idea.
Yes, that's critical. They invest heavily in making shows specifically for markets outside the U.S. If a show takes off locally, like Squid Game did in South Korea.
Huge global hit.
Exactly. They then push it globally. And this is really working in places like Southeast Asia. Local content is driving a significant chunk of new subscribers there, like 11 to 21% in Indonesia and Thailand.
So they're actively hunting for these locally authentic stories.
Yeah, and they're diversifying. Big blockbusters, sure, but also very niche, specialized documentaries. They cover the whole spectrum.
Which brings us back to Tangmo Nida. This really explains why Netflix would be interested in a case like hers.
Precisely. It's a deeply resonant local story, but it has elements with clear global appeal, mystery, potential injustice, celebrity.
And sources actually said Netflix did approach Tangmo's mother about documentary rights earlier on.
That's right. And they might reconsider if the case reaches some kind of conclusion. It fits their strategy perfectly.
So this Netflix regime, as one source called it, their way of operating, it's actively fueling the true crime boom.
You could definitely argue that. They target, quote, intelligent audiences with these high-quality documentaries. They use all the tools, interviews, reenactments, old footage to really ramp up the social outrage, the empathy. It draws you in intellectually and emotionally.
But there's a dark side to this popularity, isn't there? An ethical tightrope, especially for the families involved.
Oh, absolutely. It can be incredibly painful for them, exploitative even, forcing them to relive trauma over and over.
And sensationalism is a real risk. Skewed portrayals.
Huge risk. And then you have the online sleuths. Sometimes well-intentioned, but they can end up wasting police time, or worse.
Accuse the innocent people.
Yeah, it happens. Think about the prosecutor in the Ravis. Making a murderer reportedly got thousands of death threats.
That's terrifying.
It is. And it can permanently stain a place, too. A town becomes known only for the tragedy that happened there.
Though to be fair, sometimes the increased attention can help, right? Maybe solve a cold case.
That's the other side of the coin. Occasionally, yes. It can offer families who've waited years a glimmer of hope, maybe even closure. It's a complex balance.
And what about the viewers themselves? We talked about feeling prepared, but are there downsides?
Definitely mixed effects. Some people feel empowered, safer, but others report real negative impacts on their mental health.
Like what?
increased anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive thoughts about the cases, trouble sleeping, paranoia. It can even re-traumatize people who've experienced something similar.
So it really makes you question that line between fascination and, well, harm.
It does. How much is helpful insight and how much is just feeding a morbid curiosity potentially at a personal cost?
And specifically in the Tangmo Nida case, the media's role was complicated.
Very much a double-edged sword. They get a lot of criticism
So what exactly?
for maybe not digging deep enough into the public's doubts and instead chasing clicks, chasing traffic.
With less than professional stories.
Yeah, like interviews with shamans or people who just seem to want attention. It created this incredibly noisy circus, as that source put it, fueled a kind of court of public opinion.
Which some might argue keeps officials on their toes, forces transparency.
That's one argument, that the noise, however chaotic, ensures some level of accountability.
But the counter-argument
Is that it just makes finding the actual truth harder. Too much noise, not enough signal.
Yeah.
And it raised questions about professional boundaries too, like that volunteer rescue worker commenting on the body's condition on TV. Sparked a huge debate about who should be talking and when.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Where does the Tangmo Nida case stand now, as of early July 2025?
Well, things are still very much in motion. Tangmo's mother has been incredibly active recently.
Doing what?
Gathering court documents, apparently a massive amount needed a pickup truck to haul them, filled many crates. She's preparing for an appeal.
Okay, so she's definitely not letting it go.
Not at all. She's looking for a new lawyer, possibly Panthat Plopbonpan, because the case is just so complex and high profile.
Understandable.
And she's expressed real gratitude for the DSI, that's the Department of Special Investigation, sort of like Thailand's FBI getting more involved. She called them her last resort.
Wow. And what about that Netflix documentary idea?
That's resurfaced. She said she might be willing to reconsider it now as long as the copyright issues are handled properly.
Interesting timing.
Yeah. She'd previously declined, said she was too busy. But now, maybe she sees it as another way to keep the story alive, perhaps.
Could be. Anything else new?
Just one small point she mentioned. She wasn't aware of any news about someone planning to sue the judge involved in the case. So, lots of moving parts still.
It sounds like it. So even with legal stuff happening, it's still this really complex, deeply controversial story.
Absolutely. It's really laid bare that deep public distrust in authority in Thailand. Raised all these questions about corruption, influence, potential cover-ups.
And highlighted the power of social media, for better or worse.
For sure. As a tool for citizen journalism, for demanding accountability. It's even forced the entertainment industry there to look at its own issues, like safety and ethics.
So Tangmo Nida's legacy, it's become about much more than just her death, hasn't it?
Yeah, she's become this potent symbol, really, for that ongoing fight for justice and accountability in Thailand.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener? We've gone through this specific tragic case, Tangmo Nida's story, and we've seen how tangled up real events, public perception, and media consumption get in today's world. What started as a tragedy in Thailand became this global focal point for really big questions about justice, transparency, even the nature of truth itself. Yeah, and it's a powerful example of how our collective curiosity, especially when amplified by platforms like Netflix, can push for answers. But that same energy can create that chaotic court of public opinion we talked about. You know, when Netflix greenlights stories because their data says it will heighten social outrage, they're not just reflecting what we want to see. They're actively shaping which cases blow up globally and how intensely we react, sometimes maybe even bypassing traditional justice channels.
So here's something to think about. In this digital age where every detail, every theory gets amplified instantly, how do we navigate that? How do we, as people trying to stay informed, walk that line between pursuing truth and just feeding sensationalism?
Right.
How do we make sure that the real human stories, the tragedies at the heart of these mysteries, are treated with the respect and the care they deserve? Not just turned into the next binge watch.
That's a tough question.
It really is. Something for all of us to keep in mind as we engage with these powerful, complex stories that are constantly shaping our world.